As English language arts teachers, we constantly strive to optimize our instructional practices to grow adolescent writers. And we know that when we tightly align our instruction to our assessment practices, we empower our students to own the increasingly demanding expectations for writing. Perhaps you've already explored the suggested performance tasks or writing assessment tools in Stage 2 of the 2016-17 CCAP Writing Units of Study. And perhaps you've already designed lessons that align your genre-specific writing units of study instructional practices with the re-envisioned rubrics and newly created checklists. However, you might also be wondering how to tighten this alignment. You might start by immersing your students in the kind of writing they will be expected to write like. Then you might ask your students to identify and gather a mentor text of this writing. In other words, a text that strongly represents the notable characteristics of the genre they are currently studying. As you know, this will help you assess what your students know and are beginning to understand about the genre. At this point in the writing unit of study, you might introduce the checklist to your students and ask them to examine how the author of their self-selected mentor text demonstrated the criteria or grade level descriptors outlined on the checklist. You might then ask your students to identify one or two descriptors that they will need to further explore to better see what they might need to do as writers to meet these expectations. For example, many of your students might say that they need to further explore what it looks like to layer information to maintain tension, engage readers' interest, and build complexity. You might then introduce mentor texts or excerpts from mentor texts that demonstrate the specific skills, techniques, or craft moves. For example, the text "This is How You Get Ebola," as explained by Science by Ruth Tam, is rich with graphic images, technical language, definition of terms, expert quotes and opinions, as well as the comparisons or relationships that illustrate complex or abstract ideas connecting the unfamiliar to the familiar. And all of these skills or techniques are craft moves the author intentionally makes to layer information to maintain tension, engage readers' interest, and build complexity. As a class, you might closely study the author's craft in a series of excerpts from the selected mentor text. For example, you might study how Ruth Tam uses comparisons or relationships throughout her article. "This is how you get Ebola," to illustrate complex or abstract ideas connecting the unfamiliar to the familiar. In this excerpt, you might note in the first sentence of the first paragraph that the author uses an expert quote that compares the glycoproteins to giant oak trees with branches and leaves. And then you might note that this comparison frames the details that are used throughout this paragraph to further develop the relationship. For example, in the last sentence of this paragraph, you might notice the phrase "slicing off its leaves and branches and exposing the trunk" is used to describe how the host cell pulls in the attachment protein. This comparison illustrates how the Ebola virus spreads, helping the reader connect an unfamiliar or abstract process to a concrete image. This close study might not only help students clarify the craft moves they might make to layer information to maintain tension, engage readers' interest, and build complexity, but it might also help students see how to strategically use mentor text to strengthen their vision of the criteria or grade level descriptors. This in turn may help students set attainable goals for their writing, as well as determine next steps for refining their individual writing processes. At this point, you might show students how you note these skills, techniques, and craft moves on the checklist. These annotations might then prompt and focus your write-alouds for whole group instruction, as well as one-on-one and small group writing conferences. The criteria on the grade level specific checklists may be the just right challenge for many of your students, but for your students who need acceleration, you might opt to have them annotate checklists from above and or below grade level. You might also opt to have students annotate grade level specific rubrics, as the rubrics outline the criteria from 1 grade level above to 2 grade levels below. Using the same craft study From the mentor text, "This is how you get Ebola," you might show students how you note the skills, techniques, and craft moves for layering information across several grade levels. For example, you might note that the author used titles and subtitles to organize information and ideas into broader categories. You might then note that you will need to look for additional mentor text to see how an author layers information to allow for inferential understanding, as this mentor text does not demonstrate this writing work. Annotating rubrics may further expand your students' vision for how to strategically use the criteria or grade level descriptors to set goals and determine next steps for refining their individual writing processes, as the rubrics outline the steps students might take to grow as writers. As you continue to explore the 2016-2017 CCAP writing units of study and the re-envisioned assessment tools and practices, please contact a member of your secondary ELA content specialist team with your questions.